I don't know if this looks familiar to you, but this setting looks familiar to me. My father was a traveling evangelist, and from the earliest memory I have, I was in rooms just like this every single evening. We lived in a trailer, and my dad would drive the trailer to the new town and set up, and then for 6 evenings in a row, sometimes Saturday night too, Dad would preach. And the people would come in. And I have been in so many different churches. Even as a little guy, I remember, and my dad's told me since then, 37 different denominations. And so Sunday to Sunday there would be meetings. And then we'd pack everything up and drive to the next city and do the same thing all over again. And every evening I spent in a room that looked just like this. And I remember sitting there hearing Dad preach from the pulpit again and again. He had these tiny little notes that I couldn't even tell, how do you read those? Because his handwriting was so tiny, but he'd worked so laboriously on these messages. And the ones that the Lord seemed to use, he would repeat those when he'd go to different cities. And I'd hear those again and again and again. It might seem like an unusual life to you, but it's the only one that I knew. And so it didn't bother me to sit in the pews every evening and listen to Dad. That's how I thought life was lived. My mom was always on the platform. She played the organ. And so my sister and I would sit somewhere in one of the pews and listen every evening. And I don't know how many evenings, hundreds and hundreds, and that I would hear the message, and then I'd hear the invitation, and people would begin to go forward, and we'd watch as people one by one or in groups, and pretty soon the altar would be full, and we saw God work bringing people to Christ. One summer evening, I remember it was very hot. That's about all I remember is how hot it was. I was sitting in a pew and Dad was preaching. And I was thinking about his message, because those messages he worked so hard on, I would hear again and again as we went to different towns. And even as a boy, I sat there thinking, I know what he's going to say next, and I know what illustration he's going to use after that. And the thought came into my mind, I could preach that whole sermon. And as that thought came into my mind, suddenly a new thought came in, and I didn't know yet that it was the voice of the Lord. So this was my first time to have the Lord speak to me in my heart. By now I know the voice a lot better, but it was startling to me because it was a very different thought than I was thinking. And the thought came to me, you know the entire message, but have you ever done it? And I remember as a boy just sitting there thinking, wait, I've watched all those people decide to make a decision for Christ, and I've never done it. I've seen even children my age go forward, and I had never done that. And it just struck me. I don't know why, but I'd never thought about it before. So for the rest of the message, I'm listening with a different kind of listen. And when it came time for the invitation, as people began to stream forward, I realized that was my evening. And I stood up and I went forward. Now, the whole church was full of people at the front, at the altar. So there was no room. This church had an altar where you could go around the side also. And so I went and knelt around the side. I knew how it worked. I'd seen it every night. They would pray with people one by one for them to receive Christ, and they'd work their way down. And I knew that eventually they'd get around to me on the side. And so I knelt there and I waited. But I was short, and the platform was tall. And because of that, they didn't see me over the edge of the platform. And after everybody had been prayed for, the folks began to leave, and they actually began to turn the lights out. And my dad and mom said, "Where's Steve?" And they found me, still kneeling by the side of the platform. And my dad told me later it was a great privilege of his to kneel down next to me and pray with me as I received Christ as my Savior.